independent members of class.
Imagine that.
Was atrocious.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. Minister, you recall that in February you joined me at the Transport Museum in Glenorchy to celebrate 150 years of rail operations in Tasmania. Now, however, the future of tourism and heritage rail is in danger because of the pending dismantling of the rail line at Bridgewater. I admit to be puzzled by that. Last week in this House, in answering a question from the member for Lyons, Ms Butler, you ruled out providing a rail link over the new bridge. Minister, you also told Ms Butler, remember that we are preserving the rail corridor for future potential. Great news for the Transport Museum? Perhaps not. Minister, my understanding is that the existing bridge and lift span will be demolished, leaving a gap between the causeway and the riverbank. Minister, how will the rail corridor be preserved over air and water?
Minister for Infrastructure.
Thanks a lot, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Clark for her question. And before answering it, if I may, Mr Speaker, I'd like to welcome the students from the Launceston Christian School and their amazing teachers for joining us here in Parliament today. Well, Mr Speaker, the Gutwein and Morrison governments are rock solid in our commitments to the design and construction of the new Bridgewater Bridge. You know, that bridge that John Howard funded in the late 90s, which should have been built decades ago, Mr Speaker.
Why didn't he
The
do
money
it
was
then?
spent.
Why didn't he
The
do
money
it?
was spent by the former Labor leader on other projects, Mr Speaker. Specifically, they took the money for the new bridge and spent it to move rail on the other side of the bridge, Mr Speaker, away from Macquarie Point, away from Moona, away from Glenorchy, away from Granton, away from the bridge to Brighton, Mr Speaker. There is no rail utilising the Derwent River crossing since 2000 and I think 13 or maybe even 2012, Mr Speaker. But the money was here in the state from John Howard to build the bridge, but it was not built, Mr Speaker. This government, we've got back to getting the funding back again. Thank you to the Morrison government for the 80% funding to that. And I want to be very clear that we now have our steering committee in place. We have our project team in place. And, Mr Speaker, I am delighted to inform the House that in the last fortnight we now have tenders in from the marketplace, Mr Speaker, which means that they're now being assessed, and we expect to award that tender by the end of this year and to see construction commence next year, Mr Speaker. This is delivery of something that is needed in our road network infrastructure, Mr Speaker, which is overdue. That's right. It's overdue, and we will deliver it, Mr Speaker. And it's important that those who want to catcall around lack of rail, as if it's some new revelation, are misleading Tasmanians, Mr Speaker. Yep. Mr Speaker, as I say, that is not a new fact. Rail was moved across the river, and the member for Clark knows this, in 2012 or 13. It's also the case, I'm advised, that the business case that was developed by the then Labor Green government as a result of moving rail across the river was very clear about it as well. The Bridgewater Bridge replacement, Bridgeworks concept design, February 2012. Ms Butler, have a chat to your former leader, by GHD for the then government was for a 4-lane road bridge that did not contain provision for rail. Exactly right. Member for Clark, I hope to inform you of that as well. I then went a little further and asked the department to provide me with any documentation that went to Infrastructure Australia at around about that time. And I have in my hand that very thing, the Tasmanian Government 2012 Transport Submission to Infrastructure Australia, New Bridgewater Bridge, August 2012. So I shouldn't have to tell the Labor Party their own history, but here we go, Mr Speaker. In the goal definition, the infrastructure project will be a high standard alignment for the NLTN between the existing Brooker Highway dual carriageway and the Brighton bypass, creating a continuous dual carriageway through the residential areas of Greater Hobart between the Hobart CBD and the Midland Highway Brighton bypass. Under the positive contribution to Infrastructure Australia's strategic priorities section, The document went on to say that the opening of the Brighton Transport Hub will see the relocation of significant freight transport activity north of the Derwent River from its existing focus at Macquarie Point in central Hobart, Mr Speaker. That was the bridge that David O'Byrne, Lara Giddings and others were striving to get funding for, again, having spent the money on other things, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, I think that the questioner has a genuine wish to see light rail, even heavy rail. I'm not sure about that. Not just along the Northern Transit Corridor, but also across the bridge. Well, that is an interesting proposition, but one which is currently not viable, and the member knows that. But if ever rail were to be viable again across the Derwent River, our government has been careful to ensure that the existing rail alignment corridor is preserved forever. That's right. Forever.
Can you go to build?
We have no economic case for rail across the Bridgewater Bridge right now. It would be exceedingly expensive, possibly double the cost of the bridge from its current $576 million. And, Member for Clark, you were grizzling in the Mercury about the benefit-cost ratio on that project as it stands. You were grizzling when the BCR came in at under 1.0. And imagine if it came in at half of that. So think about the acquisitions, think about the extra ramps that would be required to get rail above a 16-metre high draft. We're looking at a completely different project. Now, for the Labor Party to even be participating in this discussion is the height of hypocrisy. Dr Mona, you're back again. Dr Mona, you're back again. And the bloke sitting next to you had a grizzle about it as well, Mr Speaker. On the 17th of September, 7:09 p.m, presumably for the next day's, special edition of the Mercury front page splash, Greater Hobart mayors question whether Bridgewater Bridge project is value for money, said Mr Winter, who was actually questioning. He said this. He said this.
If you could wind up, please, Minister.
Please. He wanted to know if there was a less expensive solution at the Bridgewater Bridge project to provide the opportunity for the Australian government to invest in more critical infrastructure projects across Greater Hobart. Honestly, Mr Speaker, we've heard enough from the Labor Party on this. The Labor Party moved rail across the river. The Labor Party took rail off the Bridgewater Bridge replacement project. The Labor Party spent the money for the bridge on other things. We're getting on the job. We're in the market, and I look forward to advising the House of the finalisation of the tenders at the end of this year, Mr.